The Allstate 12 or the Allstate Big 12, the Globe Life Conference USA. We've got private equity making its way into college football. Will the college football landscape turn into Silicon Valley of the 90s and 2000s? I don't know what's going on, but we're going to talk about it all on this episode right here. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode on the College Underdogs YouTube channel. I am your host, Trey Smith, and we've got a lot to get into today with the Dennis Dodd report on the Big 12, seriously exploring a private equity opportunity. I want to look at that and see how that could be a template for a group of 5 conferences to follow. I also want to look at the naming rights deal. I know we've all seen it by now, Big 12 and Allstate, Conference USA and Globe Life. Talk about that as well. I feel like on this episode, I have a lot of questions. As I'm taking in this information in real time, as a lot of you are as well, the first thoughts that are coming to mind are actually questions. I want to know more. I want to know specifics on how certain things are going to work. What are certain contract obligations and things of that nature? This private equity thing could be a real game changer or a real game breaker. I just don't really know yet what direction I think it's going to tilt. I do think Brett Yormark is a phenomenal commissioner. I think that anything he does is going to be well calculated. But I do have questions, and I don't know if we have answers to these questions yet. That's where you come in as the viewer. If you have some insight into how this world works, or maybe you've seen and come across some information that I have not yet, I'd love to get your input throughout this video in the comments to continue the discussion. But before I dive into it all, please like, subscribe. Come on, guys. I got like 120, 130 comments on the last video, and I think half of that are likes. So we're getting some great discussion, and I'm very thankful for that. But just like the video. Like right now, hit like or dislike. I don't care. Just push one of them. Of course, you can leave a super thanks if you feel compelled to. Would certainly appreciate that. But like, subscribe, watch it to the end. Share it with a friend. Leave a comment. And let's get into this thing, though. So Dennis Dodd, let me pull it up. I'm pulling it up. I'm just going to read it. I'll put the link to the article down in the description. So the gist of this, the article is called Big 12 Considering Private Equity Investment of Up to $1 billion for as much as 20% of the conference. Okay. We've talked about that. In fact, earlier this week, talking about best case, worst case scenarios for private equity as it pertains to helping the group of 5. Could this help be a playing field leveler, or at least keep the gap from widening at the rate that it's widening at? That was sort of the discussion points from a couple of days ago. Now we actually have this happening in real time, potential discussions, agreements, and contractual obligations, an actual deal with private equity getting involved with one of the power conferences, being the Big 12. And in Dennis Dodd's article, he says, on the table is a possible cash infusion of $800 million to $1 billion from Luxembourg-based CVC Capital Partners in exchange for a 15% to 20% stake in the league. A portion of the money would go directly to the 16 conference members, and the partnership would give the conference access to the CVC's investment services and clients. I've actually have a friend now, not anything with content, like an actual personal friend of mine now, who's pretty high up in the Big 12 offices. I'm trying to debate if I should dig for some information on this, even see if he'd be willing to come on the podcast and discuss it. I don't know. But that might be a cool episode if that's something he's at liberty to discuss, and can get him on the channel to talk about it. But here's some of the questions that I have. The number one is this a one-time like cash infusion, right? Because obviously private equity, they make their investments and they get a percentage of, in most cases, of the company, right? In this case, it's 15, 20% of the conference. Now, I'm going to talk about even that here in just a second because I have a question on that percentage. But is this a one-time deal? Because a one-time cash infusion of $800 million to $1 billion, obviously that sounds significant. I mean, it is significant. Okay, I'm not trying to minimize it. But when you compare it to the longevity or the contract that the Big Ten currently has, the media deal the Big Ten currently has, it kind of pales in comparison when you start to get over the course of, multiple years. So is this something that, was it CVC? Are they going to continue to provide money annually? Are they going to continue to provide hundreds of $1 million annually? Because another part in this article, it mentions that it gets them pretty close to the Big Ten's. Yeah, it says the Big Ten leads all conferences with its school set to earn approximately $75 million per year after it signed a new media rights agreement with Fox, CBS, and NBC. And it says the move and the two revenue streams. So Big 12 teams are currently earning $31 million a piece in media rights, the deal that ends in 2031. Add in the cash infusion from private equity, and the two revenue streams would combine to move the Big 12 much closer to the Big 10 media rights deal, according to a person with intimate knowledge of the proposal. But my question is, for how long? For how long does it move them closer to the media rights deal of the Big Ten? For the life of the deal? For the life of the contract? Or is that something that could start to wither away pretty quickly? And then you take into account that CVC will begin to take 20% of the conference. Now, that 20%, what does that include? Is it the 20% of just the media rights revenue? And is there a designated time frame on that? Or is it, no, they own 20% of the conference from now until they choose to sell it, which is a lot of times how these agreements can work, especially if you look in tech. You have a VC, they come to the table, they make a big, significant, infuse of cash infusion, cash investment for a stake in the company. I guess the first thing I think about is like Shark Tank, right? Those guys, they invest their money into a company for a piece of the company. So is this a one-time financial investment for a lifetime stake in the conference? Is that what's best in the long term? Because what that money is going to go towards isn't exactly revenue generating causes. And this is maybe where some of y'all watching this could help me out in the comments, because if the money is going towards facilities, stadium expansions, and then really the student athletes, that's where a lot of it's going to go. Those aren't things that are going to bring forth a financial return. Well, I guess a stadium expansion, you could sell more tickets, but I mean, that's not going to bring the return to really move the needle. So what I'm getting at is like, my brain's trying to think of getting this to scale where it makes sense, where of course in the short term, you got $1 billion to distribute to try to fill in that gap of that 30 to 75 million for all your teams. I don't know how many years. I haven't sat here and done the math, but if they're not going to commit, an annual amount of money in addition to that, and if it's not for a set amount of time that they have that stake to those revenue dollars, like someone help me understand how this is going to be best for the Big 12 long term. I know there's probably something here I'm missing, and that's okay. But when I look at, you invest in the conference, ultimately what makes a conference valuable is the really media revenue that conference can command. Because from the private equity standpoint, they're thinking, okay, we get 20% of this over time. we're going to make back our investment and then some. But from the conference's standpoint, just because you receive $800 million to $1 billion in like one transaction, that doesn't necessarily mean that 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the line that your conference is going to be so valuable that it'll be able to command a media deal that's the size of the Big Ten or the SEC. You see what I'm saying? Like, what is it the Big 12, like, other than it making them more competitive, other than it helping them level the playing field in terms of revenue dollars, how is that making them more valuable to a media provider? Because if they sign another deal or extension and say they get their teams $40 million, even $50 million, that's still not, one, what the Big Ten is doing under their current agreement. And two, now 20% of that is out the door. It doesn't even go to your teams. It doesn't even go to your conference. In these other areas, as I said, that money is going to go towards stadiums, facilities, student athletes, paying players directly now. Like that's not revenue generating. Now, I guess if you win on the field, I guess there's a path you could go where, your teams are more competitive. They get into the playoff and start dipping more into those dollars and cents. But there's no guarantee that you're going to get more spots in that CFP than you would get without this private equity money. You see what I'm saying? So like someone give me a different perspective on this. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm not trying to sit here. I don't know if I'm saying it's bad or good. I think what I'm saying is I have a lot of questions I would like to have answered before I make a decision personally if I think this is good or bad. Now, if you want to just talk generally speaking, I think it's where we're at in college football, whether we like it or not. I mean, we may as well be a professional league at this point. I made the joke. I don't know if any of you ever watched the old movie Basketball, but the whole intro sequence talks about the evolution of professional sports moving from a, for the love of the game to a for the love of money type entity. And that's essentially the same shift that we're seeing in college sports. And I made a joke on Twitter. I was like, how long before our college teams start moving towns seeking bigger profits, right? There's a scene in that opening sequence of that movie where it's like, and the New Orleans Jazz moved to Utah where they don't allow music, right? Talk about the Minneapolis Lakers moved to LA where they don't have lakes. It's like the West Virginia Mountaineers moved to Dallas where they don't have mountains. Totally joking. But to me, that's what this all reminds me of. Like the shift we're seeing in college sports is similar to that shift we saw in professional sports where the almighty dollar became the focal point of everything. My other question is, will teams be stuck in the conference? Okay. What if there's some Big 12 teams right now that have their eyes on a potential SEC or Big 10 invite in the future? Don't know who those are. I haven't been one of the ones that's really been speculating on all that. Don't know that I will. I know last year, I really covered the realignment story, but it was just very different a year ago because the Pac-12 did not have a media deal in place. And so if you followed that story, it's like, okay, it seems pretty inevitable that what ended up happening was going to happen. And so obviously I talked a lot about that, but right now I haven't really been speculating on who may be leaving, So, I know the Big 12 has a grant of rights in place, I think till 2031. So once that expires, or once that, would this private equity deal require teams to somehow make a signed commitment that they will stay in the conference for the long haul, right? So then my question is every team going to be okay staying in a conference that ultimately is selling 20% selling 20% of its revenue? Now, it's going to bring you a nice infuse of cash now, but again, is this the best long-term play? And it might be. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying these are my questions. So let me know your thoughts on that. I think from a group of 5 standpoint, from a G5 standpoint, I would pay attention to how this thing plays out with the Big 12, because from my vantage point, and maybe this is I could dive deeper into this on a separate episode, but is there an opportunity for those 5 conferences to sort of band together and get a private equity investment for all 5 of them, right? Could the 5 of them together command a larger investment than them individually going out trying to find these deals? And I think my other concern with this is, if this is the direction college football is going to go, who's to say the Big Ten doesn't go and do the same thing, but they get a much bigger investment because they've got a much bigger amount of revenue coming in. So they're that much more valuable to a private equity company, so they could get a much larger investment. So then it really offsets. It's like it keeps everything exactly where it is. Now, I guess the flip side is the Big Ten, SEC, they won't want to sell off a stake in their conference, which is fair because they technically don't have to. But what I'm saying is, if this becomes such a good thing that works in the Big 12's favor, who's to say they don't go off and do the same thing, and then we're just right back where we are now, except for we got a bunch of conferences named after a bunch of companies that are only control, that only have 60 to 80 to 90% of their revenue dollars. But the actual playing field is exactly what it is now. I'm not trying to go too rabbit traily on all that, but I would just say, as a G5 conference, if I'm a G5 commissioner, man, I'm having some conversations with my fellow commissioners that are in my same group, trying to go, hey, what could we string together collectively to pull in the best deal, basically, to command the most money. So anyways, let me know your thoughts. And then the other thing I wanted to get into was the naming rights deal. The Big 12 is also, this is per Ross Dellinger, Big 12 is in negotiations with Allstate as naming rights partner, and a new name has emerged of possibly being the Allstate 12. So just like we saw with stadiums, just like we saw with bowl games, it was the Fiesta Bowl, then it was the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl. I don't even know what the Fiesta Bowl sponsor is now. I know you had the Cotton Bowl, and then it became the Southwestern Bell Cotton Bowl or AT&T Cotton Bowl. Then you had the Orange Bowl, and I don't even know who their sponsor is, but I remember for years when it was the FedEx Orange Bowl. So is that what we're about to see now with conference names, where you have the All-State Big 12 or the All-State 12? And according to Dellinger, in a presentation to league leaders in May, Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark proposed selling the naming rights to the conference in what would be one of the most lucrative and unique sponsorship deals in college sports history. And then shortly after that, Dellinger dropped a bomb that the Conference USA is also deeply exploring a multi-million-dollar naming rights sponsorship, sources tell Yahoo Sports. So, hey, first off, props to Conference USA. Because if this is the direction everything's headed, may as well get in on it now. And if it's going to bring in the revenue dollars to help your programs and to do the best you possibly can to level that playing field, I'm all for it. I mean, I hate the idea of it in theory, but this is where we're at. So Conference USA, you go get your deal with Globe Life. And he's talking about the Globe Life Conference USA or Globe Life Conference. I hope the American, I hope the Mountain West, I hope the Sun Belt, I hope the MAC, I hope all of them go find a sponsor, get those dollars in to help those programs and student athletes to at least stay as competitive as possible. But what are your thoughts on this naming rights deal? I mean, is it just something we should view now as just like bowl games, like it's just a conference name, it's not a big deal? Are we going to now, start seeing their logos patch on all the jerseys and all that good stuff? I mean, I was very young when the naming rights of bowl games started to take over. So I don't know that it really resonated with me one way or the other. Kind of growing up, my childhood, most of the bowls had naming rights. I don't remember much before that. And then, of course, nowadays it seems like they change time to time. And so that could be the same thing. So it could be the Allstate 12. And then when that contract expires, if they don't renew, it could be the State Farm 12. I don't know, man. What are y'all's thoughts on that? It's a very interesting place to be right now with college football. Very critical time. And I just hope some voices that have some sense. You obviously want to do what's best for the student athletes, but you also want to do what's best for the overall product in general. And you want to have the most, in my opinion, you want to have as much parity as possible. And if these different elements with naming rights and private equity can help improve the parity of the landscape at large, I'm all for it. Still not quite sure how all that looks. Still not quite sure if that is the best way to do it, if that's even possible. Maybe the best way to bring back parity is to have some separation. I don't know. But it certainly makes for good discussion. So let me know in the comments what you think. That's it for me today. Trey Smith, College Underdogs.